When you start acknowledging or at least identifying the fact that even the CQB principles often will lead you to sudden death, then you can start looking at these problems a little bit differently and start asking yourself what are some different ways, some unorthodox and out of the box ways that we can use to minimize the risk associated with this problem. What you saw was the IDF clearing a building, and more specifically what you saw was the IDF being faced with too many problems and not enough problem solving strategies. And so if we were on the catwalk above and we placed 4 people to clear a space below us and they have no training at all and they were asked to go in there and clear this space, what you would see is them being faced with too many problems and no problem solving strategies. So whether that's they have poor training, not the right training, or just haven't been exposed to the information, that could all be the case. It's not their fault necessarily, and I'm not picking on the IDF. I just think it's important that we use what we can see as an example so that we can maybe make different decisions in those moments. So what we're going to talk about is why what they did was the worst thing that they could have done, principles, how those principles fail you in this situation, and some other options that you might have. So as we're looking at that video and you see the IDF lined up here in a layout that I drew that is likely very similar to what they were exposed with, why was the decision that they made or he made in that moment the most dangerous decision that could have been made? Well, we first have to look at where they are currently standing and what they can see from where they are standing. And from this position right here, this soldier can see about, 50% of that room or so, and this soldier over here can see another 25% of that room, meaning from where they're standing alone, they have collectively cleared 3/4 of the room, we'll just say. And so that means that if we're looking at this room individually, where is it that someone could be at this point that could hurt us? Well, if we're standing here and we're looking where we're looking and there's no shots being fired, then there's probably nobody there. Of course, we have secondary searches and things like that, but no immediate threats. So that means that the only possible threat that could hurt us is likely along this wall or in this corner. And I would argue, unless there's some type of structures here, some dressers or some things to hide behind, it's more likely that they're going to be, farther deeper into the corner, not necessarily standing there, but maybe changing levels or getting behind something. So just to reiterate, we are really concerned about what could be in that corner there. Now, as we are standing here, as the IDF is standing here, what is a major concern to them inside of this room? Well, this door is partially open. Maybe it's 25% open. And because we're making a lot of noise, it's probably obvious that we're outside the room. There's a chance that if there was a person somewhere in this vicinity looking at the door, they would have shot at the door already. But that hasn't happened yet, so we're not going to do anything to make that happen at this point here, right? If we start moving the door, manipulating the door, that could identify that we are actually there, and then someone could start shooting through it. But the only place that could potentially hurt these soldiers is anywhere in this area here, okay? Now, why going to the right as the individual soldier in this situation was that the worst decision to be made? Well, that's because he immediately exposes himself to this threat in the corner and also exposes him to any threat that may be in this area looking down this way. And to make it even a little bit worse, he is left-handed, so his strong shoulder is his left side. And as he steps through the threshold, it's even going to take him a little bit longer to even identify that there is a threat in that corner and get rounds on target. By that time, it's probably too late and he's already being shot at. And so the reason, again, why that's probably the worst decision to make is because he immediately exposed him to potentially the only threats that are of concern, right? By himself with no other coverage, which is not a good thing. Now, let's talk about the fundamental principles and why those won't serve you well here as well. So if we have opposing threats and this soldier's looking this direction, he's kind of doing double duty, he's kind of looking here, as much as he can here, he's looking straight ahead, even though he's kind of looking at a door. He can probably see a little bit over this direction. And this soldier is looking here. We have cross coverage on opposing threats. So the principles tell us that we send at least 2 people into a room, And if we're going to clear this space utilizing, we'll just say speed, surprise, and violence of action, well then we would do that by identifying to one another maybe a barrel wave or a muzzle wave that we are releasing these threats to one another, and we would send these 2 soldiers into this room and these 2 soldiers into this room. Now, that's a problem because this soldier has to turn this corner and deal with this door, and we have no idea if the door even will come open. Maybe it's being impeded by something that's causing it to not want to open all the way. Or the soldier could squeeze past this door and run into a bunch of obstructions here that cause him to not be able to actually even run a route entirely. And so what is likely to happen here, or is very probable in combat situation, especially in Israel, there's a lot of videos where immediately, even walking through the door, you're impeded. Before you even get through the door, there's things hanging, and then directly inside the door, there's stuff all over the place. So although we can do a barrel wave and these 2 soldiers can more or less execute the principles of CQB and enter this room, at the same time, this soldier would have to come into this room, make way for the soldier behind him to cover this unknown threat area over here, and that could be very unlikely that they would be able to achieve that, again, because maybe this door is impeded or there's impediments here causing him not to be able to travel along this route. And so we don't want to realize that that is a problem here when at the very last moment when we have to take this room. That is a significant problem. And it's going to lead likely to, if there is the standard here, more people being shot. Now, if we had drone capabilities, and I understand not everybody has that, but I think most people nowadays agree that if we did have drone capabilities, the best thing that we could do is maybe even be outside the house or be in another room, send the drone down the hallway, check this room, see there's no immediate threats, check this room, see there's no immediate threats, or there is in a lot of cases, as I've shown in some of my videos, and see whether or not this door is impeded. If we know all of this information, then we can make different decisions, right? If we know there's people in this room waiting for us, we're probably not going in there. We're probably going to be throwing grenades or doing whatever else it is that they do. And so if we know that staying a distance away from the room and sending technology down the hallway to search is the best case scenario, but now we don't have that option, how does the alternative solution become the extreme other end of that, which is flood these rooms as quickly as you can? I disagree with that and think that we should still utilize to our advantage time, distance, and numbers, right? We can all make decisions on the fly in a CQB environment, but when we do that, inherently mistakes are made. We run into problems that we don't see yet, right? And so the best thing that we could do is gather as much information as possible and systematically eliminate threats so that we don't run into those inevitable problems. So what are some options, or the best option in my opinion, that the IDF had in this situation to deal with this problem? Now, we might not have technology, we might not have fancy equipment, our administration probably doesn't buy it for us, it's not available to us, you're not trained enough on it, or you don't want to go buy your own things, right? There's several things that you could buy at Lowe's or Home Depot that you could get some of this stuff done. Bringing it back to just combat context, because we're not going to usually carry some of those stuff around with us in a combat situation because they're cumbersome, etc., storage and things like that. You can look around you to see what it is that you have around you that you could utilize to, what we want to try to do is manipulate this door. Why do we want to manipulate this door here while we're standing in a space of relative cover or concealment, whatever you want to call it, versus recognizing that the door is barricaded when I'm trying to push the door open, right? Well, this is a greater likelihood of risk in being shot versus doing that from back here. So I'm going to give you two scenarios where the door maintains this situation where the door does not come all the way open, so maybe it's barricaded or there's just stuff on the ground not allowing it to come open, and then the other situation where the door does come all the way open, okay? So how this would kind of play out, in my mind, is utilizing time, right? we don't have a lot of time in a combat situation. We have to kind of clear these buildings, and it needs to be done relatively quickly. But we don't have the element of surprise because you can hear gunfire going off outside. The tanks are rolling down the street. It's clearly obvious everybody just came into this house, which we've seen from videos of the IDF clearing and running into bad guys inside of a house. There is no secret. There is no surprise. I'm not going to get into how you could actually gain surprise utilizing other things, like people like to say flashbangs and grenades. Yes, those are great when you have them available to you and you could use them. If we could frag every room in a city the size of Gaza, maybe that would be preferred, but that's just not an option, which is why you don't see it, okay? So if we just maintain what we have here with this Israeli soldier up front looking this way, holding this area over here, which, by the way, if he's looking here and he sees this is absolutely clear, there's no reason why he can't cheat out a little bit this direction and hold a harder angle, okay? Then we have this soldier here who is, he's kind of doing double duty. He's going to have the first eyes into this area over here should something present itself. Granted that he can actually see just a little bit inside here, but he also has to contend with this because he's the only one, he has the greatest angle into there as well, which is typical in CQB. There are a lot of times and many times where you're going to be holding lethal coverage, pulling double duty, right? So if you're holding down a hallway and the hallway has a T at the end, well, there's equal opportunity for someone to come out of the right side as there is the left. So, there's a couple different ways to do that, but the main focus here is that you're not solely fixed on one thing and this is my thing because you have multiple areas to contend with here. So we have this IDF soldier over here continuing to hold this IDF soldier kind of pulling double duty, making sure no one pops up here and also over here. Again, are we worried about the door? Well, no one shot at us yet. We've been standing here for some time, right? But we want to find out if this door is barricaded because if it's not barricaded, then that means that we can continue to systematically eliminate threat areas by now seeing what may or may not be in this corner over here. So if we looked around as somebody who is behind the stack, behind the guy holding lethal coverage, and you say, hey, hang on a second, and you go around the corner and you grab something, preferably, I would like to use something that I can hold on to, like a long pole, a stick, a broom, something. That would be ideal. But more likely, you're gonna find something that you could throw at the door. Okay. Now, what you could expect to happen here when we do start manipulating the door is gunfire starts coming through the door. And in a combat situation, if that is the case, and you still are available here because you're utilizing some level of cover and/or concealment, then we can just send rounds through the door because this isn't policing, this is combat, right? So the important thing is that we are beginning to manipulate the door, whether or not it opens or closes, before we're actually on top of the door, right? So if we had to do CQB and move towards the door and figure out if it's going to open for me, how do we do that? Well, I think at best you use your shoulder or something, but if it doesn't open for you, now you're fighting the door, maybe you're stuck in the doorway and now you can't get through. So let's say the door comes open. Now we're even in a better situation than we were before. And that's because now we can see more inside of these rooms from a greater distance. So if the door comes open and now we can see that there is nobody here and we, again, still are maintaining coverage in this room, there we have eliminated a large portion of both rooms where someone could be hiding, okay? And so now in this situation here, the two areas now that we have to contend with are going to be basically anywhere from here and here, okay? Now, we still don't want to send the first soldier into this room because doing that still exposes the soldier to this threat over here, okay? So what I would do if that door does come open and now we have to make a decision here is I would push two soldiers up and I would have a soldier maintaining this angle here that we haven't lost as a soldier checks this area here from this threshold, okay? By doing that, we are only exposing one soldier to this area over here for him to check as much as he can. If he starts checking it, doesn't see anything, we may have checked this entire room basically from right here at the threshold. Another way you could do that, if you don't agree with threshold evaluations and doing it that way, we could still very well hold this angle here and send 3 soldiers into this room here. Although they say that you have to have a minimum of 2 to go into a room, and that is the minimum, and I do agree with that. The more that you can send in there, up to 4, absolutely better case scenario, okay? Because if there's a guy with a machine gun here, and a guy with just a guy with an AK over here, and we send 2 into this room, I mean, he's going to get the first guy, and it's a crapshoot whether he gets the second guy, but I'm going to bet that he does, okay? And now we're just in a really bad problem, okay? Now these soldiers are trying to figure out what's going on, and they come out here and they see that they have soldiers down in here, etc. So if we can send 3, definitely better than 2. So by systematically eliminating threat areas, we were able to either A, check this room from the threshold itself without overexposing ourselves to another threat, or B, again, if you don't agree with this threshold assessment, stack 3 soldiers over on this side. You don't even need to do a barrel wave because he's already looking at the greatest angle possible, and they go in and they take the room, they clear the room, and now we come back out, and now we're ready to stack up and go in this room, or do a check of the corner here from the threshold. So that's if the door comes open. Now, if we have a door here and we begin to manipulate the door, and let's just say somebody does start shooting, well, that's a lot better than us trying to go through this place right here that we haven't seen and the shooting starts here. I think most people would agree with that. And so if we work the door from a little bit of a distance and it doesn't open, we have at this point not eliminated more area for us to be concerned about. So what we can do in this situation is continue to utilize that same technique with the understanding that we've tried to manipulate this door, but we can't see what's actually here. But we also know that nobody has shot here yet, right? We've been pushing on the door. We're working the door. No one's shooting at the door. If you were a person with a gun and you were here ready to engage anything that came through the door, the assumption for most people, reasonable people, is that once the door starts moving, there's somebody there. We've been walking through thresholds our whole lives, and that's where we expect people to be, okay? And so if we start manipulating the door and it doesn't come open, and we haven't been shot at from here, I'm at least confident enough that we can continue to do what I explained before, which is hold the hardest angle here, and again, I would actually encourage you to do the threshold check before going in here, because we're still going to run into the problem where we have the door here open and potentially things inside of this room that are impeding us from getting all the way through the threshold. And so I would advise that we just do that check here. And now at this point, the only thing that we have left to contend with is this area here or this area over here, okay? So if we've done that whole check, we've pushed on the door, it didn't come open, we've checked here. The only place we actually have to get eyes on is this area here. You can do one of 2 things at that point. You can really take either room, but what I would do so that I have as many people as necessary to deal with this problem here is I would probably send 3 guys into this room, or maybe even 4 into this room, identify that there isn't anything in this corner, and then come back here and start working this problem. The difference between working the problem with a closed door now versus before is the only area left that can hurt us is this area over here. So we just have to get eyes on that. And by pushing into this room first, we can now look this direction, and we could probably identify whether there's things inside the room that are going to stop us from being able to move inside the room and run our routes. And so if this is the only place left to check, because we've had eyes on everything else, right? If we stood at the threshold and we checked all the way deep into this corner, we're concerned about this. Now when we actually go into this room, we don't have to worry about what's here. We don't have to worry about what's here or anywhere over here. We have to be concerned with what's over here. And so at least at that point, when you make entry into this room, your attention isn't divided in every single way. You're focused on this single problem over here in this corner. Of course, that's before the secondary checks happen. And if we do have limited resources and we can't throw a grenade into every room, well, maybe we have an option at that point to say, we've checked this room, we've checked most of this, we just can't see this. How do you guys feel about throwing a grenade in over here if that's something that you have available to you? And now we go into the room once the dust settles, pretty confident that there is nobody in this room that is going to hurt us at that point. So speed and surprise violence of action is a necessary component for active shooter and hostage rescue. But I would argue that if you don't have surprise, then if you're moving quickly, you're probably compromising yourself to a bad guy, a suspect, whoever, who's lying in wait and ready to hurt you. If you want to continue supporting this channel, you can do that by feeding the algorithm down below. And if you're not subscribed yet, it would be cool if you were.